Fire is always near the top of any survival skills hierarchy that I've ever seen. But what if you can't have a fire? I saw a couple videos online about different ways to make emergency camping stoves, and this sent me down a rabbit hole. How well does portable fire work when you need it to be more than a candle or a lamp? Did people historically transport things like this? I think most people know that modern isobutane or similar portable camping stoves work well, unless you're past a certain threshold combination of altitude and cold. And there's no shortage of variations on the buddy burner. I made my own version for $0 using materials that I had lying around in preparation for a camping trip where I absolutely did not need it. But I also spent some time scouring the internet after the fact to learn about what I ended up doing and if people in history did this. In this video, I'll be sharing the results of how well this camp stove that I made works, and I'll be sharing some of the findings of my rabbit hole with you. So back to the question, what happens if you can't have a fire? Well, you end up at a disadvantage when it comes to several things, like treating water for drinking or cooking, seeing, drying out your clothes, staying warm, staying comfortable, so boiling tea or heating up meals, or crafting items. So if you need to melt some pitch or glue, you often need fire to build things. So what are the reasons why you might not be able to have a fire, aside from it sometimes being illegal? We're talking about historical situations, survival situations. There are 5 reasons that I can think of. So number 1, it might be too wet. It might just be literally impossible to get a fire going, or just it would require too much effort for you to be able to do it. Number 2, there might be no materials to burn. So if you're above the tree line, if you're on ice, if you're in the tundra, if you're on a bare rock or a small island, you might not have materials to burn. Number 3, wind. In some situations, the wind could make starting a fire just simply too dangerous. Number 4, time. So if you're on the move and you get to your camp late, well, sometimes I can imagine you would need to make a decision about whether or not starting a fire is worth it. And this is still the case sometimes when people are camping. And number 5, and this is probably the most interesting one, is stealth. If people are looking for you, containing a fire or carrying the means by which to contain a fire with you could be very important. The only solution I can think of just off the top of my head to the stealth thing is the Dakota fire hole. I couldn't find any evidence that the Dakota or Lakota people specifically used this design. Every time I see this come up, it's on a bushcraft or survival blog, and they're all just kind of referencing each other. So if anyone has the actual primary source that can show that the Dakota peoples used this, then that'd be cool. Now, to be fair, this could be more of an oral tradition that was passed down. It could be that more mundane things like this are just not reported on as much. Could be a lot of things, but where we do have evidence that this type of design was used is in dwellings, where you can actually excavate and see that people had ventilation for that. But it would be very difficult to detect out in the field. Anyway, after reading the 5 reasons aloud, too wet, not enough materials, wind, time, and stealth, I thought to myself, there's got to be a solution for this, because these are all scenarios that are plausible and most certainly happened in history. And the answer to how people solved these problems was surprising to me. So I'm going to go into some examples that I found, but this is not meant to be comprehensive. Probably the easiest way to avoid getting yourself into that type of situation would be to get to some sort of a waypoint, some sort of lodging that they could reliably get to during the day that they were traveling, and then they would stay there. They wouldn't camp in the middle of the woods if they didn't have to. Now, this is just speculation. I'm not going to cite specific facts here, but it's important to note that a lot of times there were roads and there were places to stay along these roads or trails. But let's say that you weren't able to get to one of these waypoints. What I'm going to talk about here is the result of some rabbit hole Googling that I've done, and I just wanted to point out that I'm not a historian and I'm not a survival expert. To borrow some terminology from Dan Carlin, I'm a fan of these things and I'm fascinated by them. I like making videos and I want to share them with you. So here we go. Ötzi is a man that died in the Alps around 3300 BC. So this was somewhere between the border of Italy and Austria. They found on him 2 containers made of birch bark. They were both roughly the size of a coffee tin. And one of these birch bark containers had a blackened interior, and inside it there was freshly picked Norway maple leaves and fragments of charcoal. In his belt pouch, he had some prepared tinder from Fomas fomentarius, which is a pretty common type of fungus, and it's very common to make tinder out of it even today. Now, Ötzi's finding here isn't quite what I'm looking for, because this isn't any evidence that he actually contained his fires in anything. It seems to me, and it seems to the historians, or the archaeologists, that this is just evidence that he carried something with him to be able to start a fire. In this case, it was an ember that he might have kept burning for hours or maybe even days between his fires. And the evidence for that is the blackened interior on one of his birch bark containers. The next piece of equipment I'm going to talk about, I cannot pronounce it and I am sorry, but it is the kudlik or the kuluk or the, like I said, I can't do it. And I would love for someone to explain to me how to pronounce this, but it just seems like there's no proper approximation. in English for it, but in any case, I'm just going to call it the kuluk. It's a shallow crescent basin carved from soapstone, and you fill it with rendered seal or whale fat, or I guess whatever type of fat that you would have, and you would light along it a wick of Arctic cotton grass or dried moss or rabbit droppings, whatever you had. And this makes sense because it was used in the Arctic, so there was often no wood other than driftwood, which was too valuable as a material to burn. What's really cool to me, just practically speaking, is that you can trim this wick to be the size that you need depending on how much heat you need. Alright, so I'm finishing up here with my little pieces of egg cartons filled with Baby Bell wrappers and sawdust from my shed. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go camping, and in the morning I'm going to see if I can make a coffee with it. And I'm going to continue to talk about some more modern examples of carrying fire with you. So fast forward to the 14th century, and you've got this thing called a slow match, or a match cord. This is basically chemically treated hemp or flax in the European tradition, or it's a braided cypress in the Japanese tradition. And it was used for a long time, I think 300 years or so, at least, to operate guns or cannons. And you can speculate that this might have been used to do things like light a small campfire if you were done for the day before you put it out. But I wasn't able to find really any evidence that it was used for that. Once again, these people probably had other ways of starting fires, and this match cord is more of like very similar to the ember thing that I was talking about with Otzi. And it's just another example of a larger trend that I was able to see many different examples of, which is just keeping an ember going so that you could use it to start your next fire. So moving on, let's fast forward to the Edo period, which is like around 1603 to 1868 in Japan as another example. Once again, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this properly, but the shishirin looked promising. It's a small ceramic grill that is similar to what you would see at a hibachi restaurant, but I couldn't find a lot of evidence that this would have been carried by a traveling individual, similar to the way that I'm using this tin can stove. And this is a whole separate topic I want to look into, where soldiers across history had really interesting ways of drying and reconstituting food on the move that didn't require any heating at all. And sometimes this was because of the stealth issue. There was one situation that I thought was interesting too, which highlighted another strategy. Not just keeping an ember going, but keeping a small fire going constantly, no matter what, somehow. E.H. Mann in the 1880s and A.R. Radcliffe Brown in 1906 to 1908 both noted that fire was maintained by the peoples of the Andaman Islands, which is an archipelago off the coast of India, as long as possible once lit. The people would have torches with them a lot of the time, or they would even have a small fire in a clay container in the canoe while they were traveling. Alright, so that wasn't meant to be comprehensive. It was just a couple of examples that I dug up of how people dealt with this. But let's talk now about the modern camping stove, which is what most mountaineers and a lot of hobby campers would have used or seen someone use in situations where having a fire is not legal or practical. It seems like the descendants of the modern camping stove kind of started with Sawyer's magic stove. This is a spirit or an alcohol burner that used a wick to draw the fuel out. And basically this was like a more powerful version of a traditional oil lamp or a candle. Fast forward a bit, you've got the Primus, which was invented in 1892 by Lindqvist and Svensson in Stockholm, Sweden. This is the first soot-free pressurized kerosene stove, and it was adapted from a blowtorch design. So at this point there's no wick at all. The slow release of the gas is what keeps it lit until you shut it off, just like a barbecue. In 2026, I've seen a few videos showing variations of the buddy burner, which might have been around in some form before 1950, but the oldest source I could find for this was in a 1950s Girl Scout book. The buddy burner is very similar to what I built. It's a dispersed wick candle made with cardboard and wax. The only difference for mine is that I made mine with sawdust from my shed and wax cheese wrappers from that week's grocery haul. So in going down this rabbit hole, I would say that I was a combination of disappointed and humbled. Although I did find the information fascinating, I was hoping I would find more interesting information about people doing something similar to what I did. In my search, it seems to me like in most cases, aside from the kuluk or the Arctic edge case scenarios where there's no trees and there's more animal fat than there are trees to burn fires with, carrying fires with you is really not common. Carrying candles or lanterns with you is really common, and carrying the means by which to start a fire, or even the beginnings of a fire, were common. But it seems to me like carrying everything in one compact device is far less common. The good news is that in digging up this information, I found a whole bunch of interesting threads that I want to pull on, and I'm curious which one you think I should do first. So one of them is the historical record on people heating up stones and then holding on to them either while they were traveling or while they were sleeping. Another one is, as I mentioned earlier, all of the ways that people have dehydrated and reconstituted food while they were traveling. Another one's the history of how people stayed warm in colder climates in general. So not just when they're traveling, but when they're in their dwellings. There's all sorts of historical documentation, and there's tons of first-person quotes that I could read, and it could really be a longer thing, and I would have to do a lot of research for that, but I think that would be cool. And then the last one is probably the one that's the most interesting to me, is when fire is used as deception in a military circumstance. So for example, I've heard armies that tried to make it seem like they had more soldiers by lighting more fires in their camp, or making it seem like they had less soldiers by lighting less fires. I've heard of one situation where they would leave their fires in place while they relocated the army somewhere else. Anyway, let me know in the comments which one you prefer me looking into first, or if you have another idea that's better than either of these, let me know. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and if you like this style of content, please do me a favor and tell your friends.